and welcome to the Atlas Agency, a channel all about Arkham Horror the card game by Fantasy Flight Games. I'm your host Brandon, and in this video I'll be taking a look at another set of novella cards, this time the Norman Withers cards from the book Ire of the Void, the second title in the line of investigator-focused novellas. I'll run through the cards and talk a little about my experiences playing with Norman, and as usual I won't be discussing the text of Ire of the Void itself, I'll only be discussing the cards. Hope you enjoy! Ire of the Void is the second investigator-focused novella, and unlike the first book, this one features an investigator who has not been previously released in Arkham Horror the card game. That investigator is Norman Withers, the astronomer. Like the previous novella, Ire the Huntress, each physical copy of Ire of the Void comes with 5 cards for Arkham Horror the card game. That includes an alternate art version of Norman, a matching investigator mini-card, 2 replacement signature cards, and a rules reference card. Norman will one day get a regular release in a future expansion for the card game, but we don't know how far off that might be. We do know that he's not in the upcoming Forgotten Age Deluxe box, so while this is technically an alternate art card and a pair of alternate signature cards, right now it doesn't quite feel that way since Norman is available exclusively through this book. I'm going to walk you through the front and back of Norman's Investigator card, then I'll talk about the 2 replacement signature cards. After that I'll come back and share my impressions from playing Norman through a few campaigns. Norman Withers is a seeker investigator. His title is the Astronomer. He has 4 willpower and 5 intellect. Those are his strong suits, but only 2 combat and 1 agility. Like Daisy, he has the Miskatonic trait. His text box reads, play with the top card of your deck revealed. Once per round, you may play the top card of your deck as if it were in your hand at a -1 resource cost. Forced, after a weakness is revealed while on top of your deck, draw it. So you don't have the ability to try to avoid weaknesses that appear on top of your deck. You can't try to shuffle them away. Once they're there, you're forced to go ahead and draw them. His Elder Sign effect gives +X. You may swap the top card of your deck with a card in your hand. X is the resource cost of the top card of your deck. And he has 6 health and 8 sanity. So a pretty unique special ability. He can see what he's about to draw, and once per round he can go ahead and play that top card at a slight discount. And that's play only, so he can't commit the revealed card to a test if it's a skill card or if he just likes the icons on an event or asset. Let's go ahead and flip over to the back side of the card. Norman has a pretty interesting set of deck building rules. Norman has a deck size of 30. He can use Seeker cards level 0, Mystic cards level 1 to 5, Neutral cards level 0 to 5, and then up to 5 level 0 Mystic cards. Note that he doesn't get access to Seeker cards above level 0, and that gives him a pretty unique deck building style. He starts out as a Seeker with just a splash of mysticism, but as he levels up, he goes strictly into Mystic and Neutral cards, and I love the storytelling that accomplishes. He starts out as a man of science, but slowly abandons that worldview and falls deeper and deeper into the study of the supernatural. I think that's really cool, and I hope that we get a full cycle of investigators in that pattern across all of the classes. You can see the names of Norman's standard signature cards in the deck building requirements section here. Livre de Abon, and I know I'm probably mispronouncing that, and the Harbinger. We don't know what either of these cards do since they're not the signature cards that come in this promo. The Livre looks like it's some kind of a tome asset, but for now we really just have the names for these cards. Instead we get a pair of replacement cards to use with Norman. Norman's replacement signature card is Split the Angle. This is a 2-resource spell asset that does not occupy an arcane slot. Once it's in play, you can spend an action to reveal the top card of the encounter deck. Reveal just meaning peek at. You're not resolving that card. It's also got a fast trigger that lets you exhaust Split the Angle and discard the top card of your deck to discard the top card of the encounter deck. It has the spell trait, and among other things, that means it's a potential target for Arcane Initiate. The card also has 1 willpower icon, 1 intellect icon, and 1 wild icon. In my opinion, this is not an impressive signature card. As far as I'm concerned, it's basically just a skill card that you happen to be able to draw with Arcane Initiate, and that's how I use it nowadays. Anytime I've played this as an asset in the past, I've ended up not getting much out of it, so I've stopped. Spending an action to look at the top card of the encounter deck, I just don't think that there are many situations where that's going to be worth an action in solo or in multiplayer. You could probably come up with some corner cases, but most of the time I think you don't want to be doing that. The ally Alyssa Graham already gives you a way to peek at the top card of the encounter deck without requiring an action, and I'll admit that the second part does give you a way to just change the top face-up card on your deck once a turn, essentially cycling that card into another option that you can play with Norman's ability. Hold that thought. I want to get through the other card first, and I'll return and talk about that some more. Let's go on to Norman's replacement signature weakness, which is an enemy, Vengeful Hound. Vengeful Hound has 2 fight, 2 health, and 3 evade. It's got the monster, extra dimensional, and Tendalos traits. Prey, Norman withers only. No special spawn instructions, so it'll just spawn engaged with Norman. While Vengeful Hound is engaged with you, you cannot draw or reveal cards via player card effects, and when it attacks, it does 1 damage and 1 horror. As far as enemies go, at 2 fight and 2 health, Vengeful Hound is pretty easy to deal with. The fact that he shuts off Norman's special ability I don't think is too big of a deal either. Now this guy might pose a little problem if it catches you unprepared. If you don't have Shriveling or some other offensive capability out, Norman only has 1 agility, so evading it is unlikely. But if you do have your offensive spell, then you should be just fine against these stats, and if you're playing multiplayer, then any kind of combat character who can get to you should be able to handle this for you pretty easily. Overall, I think this is a pretty tame weakness, though I think every now and then it's going to hit you at just the wrong moment and cause a problem. Note that it is possible to have a situation where this is the top card of your library after your opening hand, in which case Norman's forced ability would trigger and force you to draw it, so you could potentially get stuck facing this right away with no time at all to prepare. That's actually something that can happen to Norman with any weakness, having to draw it as soon as play starts. Most other investigators don't have to worry about seeing a weakness before their first investigation phase, but I had a game of Midnight Masks where the top card of Norman's deck when the game started was Paranoia. That's the basic weakness that causes you to lose all your resources, so I started that game completely broke, sort of like a nightmare version of Indebted, and that's not especially fun. Alright, so those are the cards. So what do I think of Norman? Well, I've had a chance to play a pair of full campaigns with him, and overall I would say that I found him to be okay. I do think his deck building rules are interesting, and I appreciated having an investigator who was capable of investigating like a seeker, but who also had access to higher level mystic cards like the upgraded Shrivelings. That's not completely new. You can get a little of that feel with Marie. Her intellect is a little lower, and her seeker access is a little more limited, but it's sort of similar. I think a lot of my enjoyment of Norman did come from that mix of cards, though, while his special ability most of the time wasn't as exciting as I'd expected it to be. One thing I discovered was that relative to other investigators, Norman is sort of a fiddly investigator to play. What I mean by that is on average there's a little more component shuffling that you may be doing in a typical Norman turn. It's a lot of smaller things adding up. Keeping that top card of your deck flipped over is a fairly minor thing, but I also ended up using a token to track whether or not I'd played a card off the top of my deck that round. You also have an incentive to regularly shuffle your deck with Arcane Initiate, since not only do you potentially get to draw a spell, but shuffling also basically gives you a chance to cycle the top card of your deck into something else that you may be able to play with his ability. So that has you maybe shuffling your deck once around. Then if you still don't like the card that ends up on top, if you have split the angle out, you can use its ability to discard the top card of your deck to cycle again and try for another option. So if you're trying to play Norman to his fullest potential, there's potentially a lot of that kind of stuff that you may be doing. I think in a true multiplayer game where you're focused just on playing Norman, all of this would be satisfying, keeping lots of options available during your turns. But in a two-handed solo game, I sort of felt like Norman suffered from not getting my full focus. He either slowed down the game or else I felt like I wasn't playing him as well as I could be. That's another reason I think I wasn't a fan of Split the Angle. Discarding that card off the top of your deck, again, it gives you a chance to see a new option, but when I'm already messing around with Arcane Initiate, at some point it gets to be more than I want to worry about. Your mileage may vary on that, but that's just how I started to feel. This is the original Norman deck list that I used. This was built a little while ago. The card pool at the time was up through Carcosa Pack 3. You can see it's pretty event heavy. It doesn't have every single Seeker event, but it's pretty close. I was thinking the events would make it easy to use his ability often. A lot of them are low cost or free with the discount when they're on top of his deck. I didn't have too many assets that I wanted to use, and since Norman can't do anything with skill cards when they're on top of his deck, I kept the number of skills pretty low, just guts and deduction. I tried to include plenty of things with the fast keyword too, reasoning that playing those without having to draw them would be extra efficient. For the level 0 Mystic cards, I went with Alyssa and Arcane Initiate because of their interactions with Norman's ability, also 2 Ward of Protection. I figured these level 0 cards would be ones that I'd want to keep around, that I wouldn't be upgrading. This was before Ward of Protection level 2 and Arcane Initiate level 3 had come out. One of the things that kind of annoyed me initially that I had to sort of get over was that it kind of felt like a waste to give one of my limited level 0 slots to a card I knew I'd be upgrading, since I'd have to pay experience later if I wanted to backfill another level 0 card into the slot that would open up. That's why there's no shriveling here. I figured Norman could just slide by without it in Scenario 1, which is not too hard to do in multiplayer, and then pick up Shriveling level 3 as soon as possible. If you start with Shriveling in the deck, then when you upgrade it, you're no longer using your max number of level 0 cards. That whole aspect of his deck building is kind of annoying. It's especially noticeable with the Mystic class, since they have a tendency to have a lot of upgrades for their core essential cards. I think you're better off just letting go and not overthinking it. If you have fewer than 5 level 0 Mystic cards later on in the campaign, it's not really a big deal. So how did this deck do? Well, okay-ish. Fairly often it felt like I was flooded with more events than I could use. I learned early on that I wanted Arcane Initiate much more than I wanted Alyssa Graham. I came to resent those 2 copies of Guts. They ended up on top of my deck with an almost sinister frequency. On the positive side, I really liked how Magnifying Glass and Working a Hunch worked with Norman's ability. Here's an updated version of the deck. I've not played this version yet, but if I were to redo the deck today, I think it would look something like this. This is based on the card pool as of the end of the Carcosa cycle. Most of that event suite is still here. I know I said I got flooded with those at times, but looking at the other level 0 cards available, there don't seem to be a lot of better options to bring in. I did take out Ward of Protection. I would probably, at this point, just pick up the level 2 version of Ward later on. I did add 1 copy of Storm of Spirits. Alyssa is gone, and I'm up to 2 copies of Arcane Initiate. Guts is gone. I've added Fieldwork and St. Hubert's Key. I think both of those assets should be good fits for the deck. Since this is untested, I'm not going to post it to ArkhamDB just yet. I might write it up and post about it later if I get a chance to play it, though. That's all for this look, but for more of my Arkham stuff, you can check out the other videos on the Atlas Agency YouTube, as well as the Atlas Agency WordPress, over at atlasofarkham.wordpress.com. As always, thanks for watching, and good luck in your own investigations of the mythos.